I understand the pain, the humiliation, and you treated with disdain.
Directly delivered in the hands of the world's peer terrorist groups. Now, more than 500 women
and
contempt. I also come from a country that went through 12 years of war.
He served as part of his military faction. He humiliated me every day.
The birth. When a black-clad figure strode to the dais in the great Al-Nuri Mosque in Mosul on June 29, 2014, few probably expected such a momentous, if hubristic, declaration, namely, that the man had re-established the Islamic Caliphate and that the world's Muslims owed him allegiance as Caliph Ibrahim. The statement from the self-appointed leader, better known as Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, represented the first serious attempt at reconstituting the Caliphate since 1924, when the secularizing Turkish Republic abolished the institution following the Ottoman Empire's dissolution. When al-Baghdadi elevated himself to the high office following his Islamic State group's stunning battlefield successes in Syria and Iraq, he envisioned a legacy in which all Muslims would fall in line and help him establish sovereignty over all the earth.
I understand the pain, the humiliation, and you treated with disdain.
directly delivered in the hands of the world's peer terrorist groups. Now, more than 500 women.
Al-Baghdadi saw himself as one to make Islam great again and expected to achieve the same success that the Prophet Muhammad's followers enjoyed when they greatly expanded the original caliphate in the late 7th century AD. But as we now look back at the life and demise of al-Baghdadi, it becomes clear that he was a failure. Beyond briefly controlling territory the size of Britain and a population of 10 million people, the only accomplishments to his name were the notoriety he established for himself and his religion, and dwarfing the accomplishments of Al-Qaeda and other jihadi groups. Not only did he fail to unify all Muslims and lead them to a global conquest, his only lasting legacies might be his group's deep split with others in the jihadist movement like Al-Qaeda, depraved violence against believer and non-believer alike, and carnal pillage on an epic scale.
أو داعش الحاتة تقودنا مرة أنت اسمع لي خسري خوكن بكهن بشتهنجي خدم مخهارو تعبي توان خد براي مجي تخلي غرتد بيزين بس خوش كام بغارينا ناتي غكب مهاتيو.
Slavery as a desperate ploy. Once the United States and its coalition allies launched operations to target the Islamic State in September 2014, the movement went into a steady downward spiral. The group executed tens of thousands of ostensible apostates whose main crime was to work with the US-led coalition, the Syrian regime, or the Iraqi government, and incited attacks against the mosques, schools,
and sold in the flesh trade market of the Islamic State,
and religious processions of non-extremist Muslims. Unsurprisingly, the group also turned its guns on non-Muslims, particularly northern Iraq's Yazidi community. Another aspect of al-Baghdadi's legacy is the hyper-carnalization of Islamist extremism. Don't get me wrong, carnal attack has always been a weapon of war, but al-Baghdadi's Islamic State took the practice to new depths of perversion. First, the group encouraged thousands of Muslim women and girls to emigrate to the Caliphate to become war brides and bear children to jihadist fighter husbands. Second, he legalized the slavery of non-Muslim women as his fighters captured thousands of Yazidi and Christian women and girls. Thus began the institutionalization of slavery in this Islamic State.
Has
been exposed and captured on camera, perhaps for the first time.
And contempt. I also come from a country that went through 12 years of war.
How it started. The Islamic State's formal introduction of systematic slavery dates to August 3, 2014, when its fighters invaded the villages on the southern flank of Mount Sinjar, a craggy massif of dun-colored rock in northern Iraq. Its valleys and ravines are home to the Yazidis, a tiny religious minority who represent less than 1.5% of Iraq's estimated population of 34 million. The offensive on the mountain came just 2 months after the fall of Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq. At first, it appeared that the subsequent advance on the mountain was just another attempt to extend the territory controlled by Islamic State fighters. Almost immediately, there were signs that their aim this time was different. Survivors say that men and women were separated within the first hour of their capture.
For the sexual gratification of its fighters,
cover my body. I was tortured. 3 months after my abduction, I was finally able to escape.
Adolescent boys were told to lift up their shirts, and if they had armpit hair, they were directed to join their older brothers and fathers. In village after village, the men and older boys were driven or marched to nearby fields, where they were forced to lie down in the dirt and sprayed with automatic fire. The women, girls, and children, however, were hauled off in open-bed trucks. It seems that the offensive on the mountain was as much a carnal conquest as it was for territorial gain. An eyewitness and affectee, 15-year-old F,
and the Islamic State are now coming to light. A very well-organized,
says her family of 9 was trying to escape, speeding up mountain switchbacks when their aging Opel overheated. She, her mother, and her sisters, 14, 7, and 4 years old, were helplessly standing by their stalled car when a convoy of heavily armed Islamic State fighters encircled them. Right away, the fighters separated the men from the women. She, her mother, and sisters were first taken in trucks to the nearest town on Mount Sinjar, where young girls were loaded onto buses. The buses told another story.
The images you see,
Merchandise to be exchanged.
And I spent another 7 hours at the sea.
So many Yazidi women and girls were loaded inside these buses that they were forced to sit on each other's laps. In addition to Mosul, women were herded into elementary schools and municipal buildings in the Iraqi towns of Tal Afar, Sola, Baj, and Sinjar City. UN investigators estimate more than 5,000 Yazidis had been rounded up and slaughtered, and some 7,000 women and girls forced into adult slavery.
وبين شيخي دوانب جي شاكي خوي كامل وتقريبا بين جي كتني وغرفة كتكشت.
Why this lure works. In its magazine Dabiq, ISIS claimed that there is a long tradition of war booty.
After 8 hours trip, I was sent back into the sea. I was refused to land.
Concubinage and religious sanction for taking women as slaves. ISIS even coerced local Sunni women into forced marriages.
I arrived in Guinea, seasick.
Finding justification in the Holy Book and one-sided declarations in religion, it used an extensive propaganda machinery on social media for its purposes. Groups such as Boko Haram in Nigeria and Islamic State in Syria and Iraq.
I left Sierra Leone on a fishing boat.
from various ethnicities, religions, and communities are subjected to
resorted more to such practices as they lose ground militarily and take slavery as the crutch supporting them in their losses. Apparently, offering kidnapped women and girls to jihadist fighters as carnal slaves or wives helps militant groups lure and retain members, while carnal trafficking can bankroll their extremist operations. So it's all about the money, like always. The Islamic State is not alone in its practice of female slavery.
Now, the extent of the Islamic State brutality is well known.
Since it began its insurgency in 2009, Islamist militants of the Boko Haram have abducted thousands of girls and women in northeast Nigeria. Most notably, the more than 200 Chibok girls snatched from their school in April 2014, with many used as cooks, carnal slaves, and even self-destructors. Boko Haram members are alleged to have purposely impregnated women and girls to produce the next generation of fighters.
$50 for Aisha. $100 for Aisha.
To serve as part of his military faction, he humiliated me every day.
And it doesn't end there. Such allegations had emerged even against Osama Bin Laden. Kola Bouf, the former alleged slave of Osama Bin Laden. She claimed that she was held prisoner and was forced to have carnal relations with Bin Laden in 1996, when she was pursuing an acting career in North Africa. According to her, he had forced her to live with him for 4 months at a hotel in Morocco. She had allegedly escaped to Spain, and in 1998, Bin Laden threatened to kill her after reading her book of poetry, which was critical of Islam. She has also been marked for demise by the Sudanese-based National Islamic Front in response to her writings condemning slavery in Sudan and the ill treatment of African women.
Women and girls, but they took us as war booty, as
وكم حضرتك يترمبيلات الترمبيل خواجي بكري وكالا ميربو يعني برجعوا يحموا أشبيبو أسلوكش خالا مكريان.
Al-Shabaab, an extremist organization, is fighting to create a fundamentalist Islamic State in Somalia and has launched attacks on neighboring countries, which have all sent troops to fight them as part of an African Union force. Kenya has borne the brunt of Al-Shabaab's counterattacks, and the Kenyan army is hunting fighters in the thick, bony forest that straddles the border with Somalia.
and we have done it at our own peril as an international community. We have misunderstood them.
In a short time, horrific stories of women who have been taken to Somalia against their will emerged. The women were both young and old, from Christian and Muslim communities, from Mombasa and other parts of Kenya's coastal region. They were usually promised high-paid work in another town or abroad, and then kidnapped. It seems the jihadist diaspora has a problem, and it is of the carnal kind. But what's even more surprising is the involvement of women as the slavers in the setup. Startling details surfaced of British female jihadists forcing captured Iraqi women into carnal slavery.
Now take a look at these images from a real sex slave market for the ISIS.
He forced me to wear clothes that didn't.
At brothels run by militants of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Allegedly, the brothels, operated by the female police force called the Al-Kansa Brigade, has been set up for the use of ISIS militants.
They are selling the girls out.
It is as bizarre as it is perverse. So why was it happening, and how is it justified? The only plausible explanation was the half-baked explanations or justifications created by such organizations, steeped in religious jargon taken completely out of context.
That terrorists in Iraq and Syria perpetrate on women.
The Islamic State did not just come to kill our
These justifications played on the incomplete religious knowledge and fantastical desires of Islamic glorification retained by the believers. If ignorance is bliss, it only serves to lure its foolish practitioners to their own destruction.
They rape them in other conflicts, but they don't sell them.
That's all we have for you, folks. Join us next time.